Hello, everybody. This is Christoph, and this is ExtraNormal Podcast. Alongside me is the usual, my wife, my lovely wife, the usual.
The usual.
You're the usual. You're like the sandwich I always get at the sandwich shop forever.
Oh, that sounds boring.
You're my forever sandwich.
Oh, how poetic.
If you had to eat one sandwich for the rest of your life, what sandwich would that be?
I could eat the same thing every day.
Well, what sandwich would it be? You off your you're not a vegetarian anymore. Don't lie to the people. But if you could, guilt-free.
I'm not happy about it, everybody. I just want you to know. It's because of a lot of food allergies I was having to eating vegetarian and soy. My favorite sandwich would probably be, I really like peanut butter and jellies.
People are probably tuning in and oh my God, they're talking about Ed Kemper. I'm like, and the first thing they hear is, my favorite sandwich is peanut butter and jelly. So on point.
Hey.
So on brand. What?
You're the peanut butter and I'm the jelly.
There we go. So, last week...
Ed Kemper's the bread.
Ed Kemper is not the bread. Last week we talked about definitely top two famous Mama's Boy murderers.
Thank God not you.
Yeah.
Well, just Mama Boy in general.
I'm
glad you're not a murderer.
Oh, you
but
okay.
I'm also glad that you're not a Mama's Boy.
Okay, good. I was going to say, are you going to put on record that I'm a Mama's Boy? Because I don't think that's accurate, man. We're going to be talking about the other famous Mama's Boy murderer. The one, so with Ed Gein, last week's episode, if you didn't watch it, hear it, whatever, tune in because we talked about Ed Gein and his obsession with his mother, his devotion, he idolized his mother. Now we are going to switch over to Ed Kemper, who was obsessed with his mother, but in a different way. Almost like he obviously hated his mother, and his killing spree was spurred on by his mother. But I get the sense that even though it's infamous in interviews and everything, he says that he was driven by his hate for his mother, that he was almost in love with his mother, too.
I feel like people that are mistreated by their parents, grandparents, if they're not treated as their favorite child, there's this weird underlining. You really want to fight for that acceptance. And no matter what it is, even though you might despise them and hate them, deep down,
you still want
You still want it. You yearn for it, and I think it takes a lot of going to therapy to kind of work through that, but I don't ever think it really goes away.
Well, let's talk about how it didn't go away and how someone had therapy. So we're talking about, again, a man by the name his given name was Edmund Emil Kemper III, and the third is actually pretty goddamn important in this case because we'll get into it. He was born on December 18th, 1948. He weighed in Burbank, California at the time. Did you hear how much he weighed?
Was it 13 pounds?
13 pounds. He weighed in at 13 fucking pounds.
Ow. All the ladies out there are like,
That's you just once you get a sense of that, you book the first appointment for a C-section.
Hell to the motherfucking yes.
I'm not going to do this.
But back then, I don't think there was that option.
His streak of terror has garnered him the nicknames the Co-Ed Killer, which is his most famous nickname. Also, the Ogre of Aptos, the Mad Titan.
But talk about how tall he was. Why was he called the Ogre?
Well, and his other name was Big Ed to his cop buddies. The reason why he was called Big Ed when he was fully grown, he was 6'9", I think about 285. So he was a big guy, big from birth, because 13 pounds is gigantic. I think
it said at the age of 4 years old, he was already a head taller than everybody.
Yeah. And so other than being gigantic, what set Ed Kemper apart from any other child? Well, he was born into a very troubled childhood, a product of divorce. He had a lot of the infamous mom of Big Ed was Clarnell, and Clarnell seemed to be very. She went through a divorce, and she was a very tough woman. She was very verbally abusive, and apparently his father was too. She was an alcoholic, And so it obviously broke apart Ed's mother and father's their relationship. And actually, the dad, Edmund II, Edmund Jr., he talked about he was a World War II veteran, right? And he actually was quoted. I don't know who got this quote, but it's all over the place. It's verified that he said that he would rather basically go back to World War II, fighting in World War II, than living with Clarnell, his wife at that time. Yeah. So they divorced. I think they divorced when he was about 8. And that kind of sent Ed into a spiral. And Ed started acting strange. Ed started playing weird games with his sisters, and he was the middle child, so he was right smack dab in between an older sister and a younger sister. Ed started playing strange games with the family. He started playing games like Gas Chamber. He started playing games like Electric Chair, and also a game where they rolled each other in the rug. And what would you imagine? So if someone told you, let's play a game of Gas Chamber, what would you say? What would you guess that game would be?
At that age, I wouldn't even know what the fuck that is. So I definitely would be like, that doesn't sound like fun.
Why do you know about Gas Chamber?
Yeah. Like,
you fucking weirdo.
So I might go along with it for a few minutes, and then once I realized what it was, I would definitely deep down feel like this is fucking weird and wrong, even at like a young age like that.
And for just a slight step backwards, at this point, they were living in Montana. So parents got a divorce. Dad stayed in the. He was born in Burbank, so Dad stayed in the area. He was in Van Nuys, which is close to here, if you're familiar with the region. Mama and the 3 kids moved to Montana. So at this time, Ed was living in Montana, and he was starting to develop these weird games. He would pop the doll heads off of his sister's dolls as like a game, and he liked the popping sound, which is going to cue to what happened later on in life. But Gas Chamber, I feel like getting back to Gas Chamber, I feel like if I were asked to play Gas Chamber, I would definitely play it once, maybe twice, and even probably like enjoy it because like, this is fucking weird. Mm-hmm. But when little Ed asked to play it for the 100th time, you're like, dude, you're freaky. Like, let's cut this shit out. Like, it's fun to play like essentially cops and robbers for a couple times, but like when you're playing,
yeah.
He was,
and also he would play games where like, and this is crazy because like, how did a little boy mentally know like for future? Like they would wrap each other, him and his sisters up. They would wrap them up in a rug, like, and that's, I mean, how many?
You're trying to get rid of a sex worker, yeah.
But that's exactly like shit that you see on TV today and in real life what people do to hide bodies. So
yeah,
it's like this. He's just like already at such a young age was already so fucked up and twisted.
Yeah, he was twisted, so twisted that the point where when he was still living in Montana, there was 2 things that happened. Other things that happened that was a telltale sign that this guy wasn't right. One of them is in 2nd grade. He had a little crush on his teacher, which happens, right? It happens. Like we all get crushes on people, and sometimes they're teachers. Well, apparently he had a crush on her, and his way of kind of expressing that crush is he would get his dad's bayonet. He would get an old bayonet, and he would stalk his teacher, his secondary teacher, and he would
go to her house. Like, okay, so our daughter is in 2nd grade right now, yeah. And the idea of like whether you have a very like smart IQ or not, like how was this little boy? How was he able to like leave school, follow this teacher home? Like, where's his mom? Like during all this, and like having free time to go to her house. Like it just, to me, that's so baffling.
Well, I mean, this was 1970s.
Yeah, but
not 1970s, 1960s.
Right, but still, I'm just kind of like just the idea and just the knowing of I'm going to go to her house. I'm going to follow her. Like it's like I'm just thinking about like our child, and she's the only child. She is very bright, but just that mentality, you don't think like that.
You don't. Well, what else you don't say is if your sister asks you, teasing you, of course, in a childlike way, oh, you're gonna kiss your your second grade teacher because you have a crush on him? He said, I might kiss her, but if I kissed her, I'd have to kill her first. What? From a second grader?
Yeah.
Like, what? There's so many things that, like, for Clarnell's sake, without spoiling the ending, that like, she was a piece of shit, it seemed like. But, like, the fact that she didn't get out of that, or it just, the fact that it led up to the ending that it did is just
to me,
insane.
like, okay, maybe you hated your son for whatever reason. He reminded you of your ex-husband. Whatever the reason is, you know that your son is twisted. He should have been in severe, like, some kind of psychiatric, some kind of therapy. I mean, maybe in the 60s it wasn't that big of a thing for children.
Well. He got severe psychiatric help because, getting off to one more thing, that was a signal of maybe
2 more things.
Ed wasn't right. Well, maybe you have a second thing, but I have one. I only have one. I'm good for one shot, and then I'm out. His mom got to the point where she was so essentially creeped out by her son. Like, she was so scared of her son being this kind of, for lack of a better word, deviant. It's probably not the right word, but a deviant, that when they lived in Montana for, I think, about 6 months, she was scared that her own son would abuse her daughters,
like
his
rape,
sisters,
and
sexually
kill,
abuse or hurt, that she locked him in the basement at night. Mm-hmm. So imagine this, like, I grew up with 2 siblings. Imagine it's time to go to bed. Like, all of us are watching Ninja Turtles or whatever, and mom calls the wraps on bed, and they're like, okay, little Nathan and Jeremy, which are my brother's name. I don't need to be that specific, but it paints a picture. Okay, Nathan and Jeremy, it's time to go to bed. And Chris, it's time for you to go to bed too. Great. Okay, Nathan and Jeremy, you go to your rooms. Chris, down to the basement for you, where there's one light at the end of the stairs. You could hear the rats, and you were locked in there on the dust, on the dirt. So that was just another thing. There was, fucked up his head.
On top of everything, there's no nurturing, no loving, no compassion. So, I mean, maybe he would have been drawn to do this stuff regardless, but she definitely added to this as a mother. It definitely came from within. Well, but that other thing that I was going to bring up, which I think is a really good part of the story, I forget what age he was. Maybe you can correct me. But as, like, either, I want to say he was preteen. I want to say it was before he was a teenager. He went to a magic show. Correct?
Oh, so part of his motivation, and by the way, before we get into that, do you know why his mother didn't want to coddle him? Do you remember her reasoning, her sad reasoning?
I do, yes. Quote, end quote.
She didn't want him to turn out gay, which is completely lovely fucking product of the time. Like, that whole thing was just, it's so fucked up. Especially, like, the older time folks, not all, but there's plenty of old-timey folks who had that kind of belief that if you were nice and sweet to your kid, they might turn out gay, and that was the reason why they're gay. It's completely fucked up.
I don't know. And Italian and Latino families, they fucking coddled their sons. Their sons were Jesus Christ, still are today. So for me, it's like, it's weird because culturally, like, okay, in, Latino Catholic, religions, even still to this day, they pretend like gay doesn't exist, but they do very much coddle their boys and their family. So yeah.
Sure. Yeah. What you were alluding to is Ed Kemper was not shy of interviews. The man gave a plenty of interviews, like, and that, I think that gets into some of his psychology. I think he liked some of the aspects of the personality he was portraying, that he was this murderer who knew that he was evil and all this stuff. Mm-hmm. Anyways, in one of the interviews, he said that he went to a magic show, and there's the old guillotine trick where all the kids are going to think that the magician asks for a volunteer, and the kids are going to gasp. Oh, and then apparently when he was at this magic show, he said a very attractive, like, 16-year-old. This is probably, he gave this interview when he was 30, which is not off from Ed Kemper. But he said a very attractive 16-year-old went up and volunteered, and everybody was giggling and stuff like that. And they did the trick where they sliced the potato, essentially, sorry, magicians, if I'm breaking the veil. But they essentially sliced up a potato, and it was a fake little stunt or whatever. But this triggered something in his mind. It was like, another step of
it was like titillating. Like, it was like erotic. It was all the feels because she was pretty. It was like, oh my God, her head's getting cut off. And there was enjoyment from seeing somebody that, I mean, even though it was a magic trick and fake, but like for the idea of it being real to him was like everything. And we also had forgotten to mention, as a child, which is a very bad sign, he would kill animals as well.
So after the divorce, he one of the retaliatory things, because he was upset, because he loved his dad. He was obsessed with his dad. His mother, he always hated, but secretly wanted to love him, I believe.
I do too.
But his dad, he adored his dad. And so he was very upset because there was a divorce, and for him, it wasn't just a divorce where, mom's living in like this town and dad's living in one town over, and I see him every weekend. Mama Clarnell was like, "Nah, I'm fucking moving to Montana." So he barely ever obviously saw his dad. So it was heartbreaking for him, and not that he should be a sympathetic character. His childhood is sympathetic, but what he did, plenty of people have come from abusive homes. They don't act like this. It's not an excuse for what he did. But he, as a retaliatory act, he actually killed 2 of the family cats. Sorry, Mr. Mittens, who's our cat here. I know this is going to be hard for him to hear. He's sleeping. But one of the things...
Or is he?
Is he? Yeah. One of the things he did is he buried alive the cat. Once the cat was no longer with us, he resurrected the cat. He didn't resurrect. This is not Frankenstein. He dug
Frankenweenie.
He dug back up the cat, and he decapitated the cat and did all kinds of things. Decapitated the cat. So he did all this shit. Like this is before the age of 15. He's doing all this stuff, which is like, he actually, some of his psychoses and some of his habits and stuff like that, because he was so anxious, he was so open to being interviewed and everything, he actually led a lot of breakthroughs in terms of people's mapping the psychology of serial killers. He was, famous to be on the Netflix show Mindhunter. He done the book that based off, like he had all that. So he had a ton of these like fucking markers, right? And he wanted out. And so I believe at the age of 14, he moved back to California, to Van Nuys, in hopes that he would be accepted by his father and he would be taken in.
Meanwhile, his father had already started a new family.
Yep.
So, I mean, he'd already moved on, which I also think probably to Ed was probably devastating. You're going to see your father and he's just living this other life without you and just acting like, everything's fine and, leaving you behind. Like, that's devastating. I understand.
Yeah, I mean, the man he adored, and he was obviously unstable. The man he adored, essentially, he had two parents. One of them he adored, who had written him off, and stayed in Van Nuys, hadn't moved to Montana, hadn't convinced Clarnell to stay in Southern California, whatever. And the other parent had completely just abused.
Mentally,
emotionally,
probably physically too. Who knows?
I don't know. There's not really reports of that, but it wouldn't blow me away if that happened. But the thing with Kemper is like, for as much as he's a manipulator, he's an open book. Like, he's just like, this is what I did. He's very manufactured. So I think if there was a lot of physical abuse, he would say it, especially because he knows. I think Ed Kemper knows. In that instance, he would know that he was feeding the story, because I think he likes the narrative of himself.
Yeah, true.
So Ed goes from Montana. He runs away from home to Van Nuys to find Dad. He finds Dad. Dad takes him in for a while. Edmund Jr. takes him in for a while, and like you said, he remarried. So stepmom's like, I can't deal with this. This kid is too
Obviously
much.
Has
he's
issues,
like,
yeah.
He's extra in a knifey way. So we can't. So stepmom, Ed Jr.'s new wife, convinces Ed to say that you can't live here anymore. But the solution is for him to go further up north in California to live with his grandparents. Edmund the first of his name, and grandma. And so, as a compromise,
I have a question though. Was that his ex-wife's idea? Ed's mom's idea?
No,
because I thought that
no, it was not. It was Ed's idea, and actually, there's some speculation, or there's some stories that Clarnell told Ed, don't let him move in with your parents. Ed Jr. Ed the third Kemper. It's so confusing now. He was worried that I think Clarnell was actually quoted as saying, like, he's gonna kill your parents.
Yeah.
They didn't listen. So Ed Kemper ends up moving up north to Northern California to live with the grandparents. I'm not sure. I don't remember how long exactly he was living there, but for a short time, it's a very short spell, because when he was 15, Ed got in a fight with his grandma. And Ed, do you know what the fight was about?
No, what was it about?
So Ed wanted, because something he was creating some suspicions. Ed's grandma did not want him wanted to take away his shotgun.
Because I think at the house, that's where he was like abusing it with animals. Like he was getting a little too, like anything he could kill, like the birds.
Think there was, yeah. He was being a little.
So she was a little fearful. She started hiding the guns in the houses.
Yeah, so she tried to hide his shotgun, or try to take away his shotgun, saying, this is not yours anymore. He got a hold of it. Mm-hmm. He shot and killed her in the head
at the breakfast table.
At the breakfast table, which killed her, but he shot her a few times in the chest for good measure. So Ed, being Ed, decided to, instead of just right away turning himself in, fleeing or whatever, Ed decides to go out on the porch with his shotgun, like a good old-timey horror film.
Well, Grandpa was gone at the store, right?
Grandpa was gone at the store. Grandpa was doing a grocery run. And the reason why Ed was waiting in the porch is because this is what he says. This is his in his head. It's trying to fucking link this chain is fucking, it's hard. But in his head, he didn't want his grandpa to come home to his dead wife. So his fucking solution is, right after Ed the first is getting out of the car, he shoots him and kills him on the spot in the driveway.
Because he's doing him a favor.
Because he doesn't want him to stumble on his wife's body, even though he's the one who murdered his wife's body.
Right.
Ed is full of contradictions, and there's another contradiction that we'll get into once he starts getting into the, I hate using the meat of his murders, which is probably a bad pun to use. I apologize. So he does this, right? So he's officially on the books for killing two people. His own blood, his grandparents, who seemed to be, he said that his grandma was tough.
Kind of like his mom.
But there's no good indications whether she was as rough as good old Clarnell. So what does he decide to do? And this is something that again, like the fact that he's so on record for hating his mother, his relationship with his mother is so dependent and so bizarre, because what he decides to do, he doesn't flee after both killing his grandma in the house and killing his grandpa in the driveway. He doesn't decide to flee. Who's the first person you think he calls?
His mother.
Calls his mother. Calls Clarnell. It says, "Mommy, I just murdered Grandma and Grandpa." And Clarnell, I mean, the only thing to her credit, as opposed to the Brian Laundrie family, which is fucked up. They haven't found that dude, by the way, yet.
They better find him.
Because his parents gave him a good head start. Clarnell, to her credit, one of the few things to her credit, said, "You need to call the police and turn yourself in." So that's what Ed Kemper does. He turns himself in. At this point, he's obviously psychotic, and he's a minor. So he's convicted. I think he's found, I always get this confused, I think he's found not guilty by way of insanity. I don't know if you're found guilty by insanity or not. Anyways, I'm sure everybody will correct me.
Well, especially when you're a
But
minor.
he's a minor and he's found guilty, but he's found to be insane by the eyes of the court. So he goes to a severe mental institution at the age of 15.
Manipulates all of them.
And because one of the things that we need to cover is the fact that Ed Kemper has an IQ of 136, I believe, which makes him on record, at least. I mean, nobody gave Jack the Ripper an IQ test, but who knows? He's on record, I believe, as the smartest by way of IQ tests. We can debate whether IQ tests are the right metric or whatever, but he's the serial killer on record for having IQ tests done of being the smartest by way of IQ tests. So he's not an idiot, right? He doesn't have any kind of mental disabilities or anything that would limit his mental capacity or anything like that. But he's definitely diagnosed as being insane. I think maybe schizophrenic. He's diagnosed as too. So at 15, he goes to this mental institution, which is a tongue a full. But he goes to this, right? And he lasts about 6 years, and he schmoozes it up with the psychiatrist. They actually let him administer tests.
Yeah.
Which is why?
But see, and that's why, like, even in his later interviews, you can go online and watch him speak. That's what's actually, I think, a little bit more intriguing with this case as opposed to the other Ed. Ed Gein.
Ed and Ed.
Because, like, with Ed Gein, it was all hearsay. You talked to the townspeople, but you didn't get to watch videos of him speaking, of him saying his side of the story, why he felt this way. This guy said he was an open book, but was he acting? Was there something more darker? I don't know. Did he sell his soul to the devil?
Darker than what he did?
No, but I'm saying, was there a different story? Because, he has his like, well, it was my mom's fault, and he's blaming his mom. And he does take accountability, and that's the thing where I feel like he twists you to try to make you feel bad for him. This is why I did this. But look, I'm being honest about it and open. So it's this weird thing when you're watching him because he's even manipulating us. So that's why I wonder if there's something more to the story.
Well, I mean, I think that there is something. I don't know if there's more. I think that what Ed Kemper does is in these interviews and stuff.
It's just a mass manipulator,
I think
personality disorder.
I think he's also telling.
We know a few of those.
He's telling. I know. He's telling the truth in terms of what happened to him from his childhood, right? And I think his motives are, like his expressed motivations for murder, I think are accurate. It's a matter of, like, there's always that, like, if you listen to any kind of serial crime, true crime show, like, there's always that core element. You have to have trauma. You have to have, like, be showing signs of hurting animals early on, and that's verified that you have to have some mental psychosis because trauma doesn't equal, reciprocating that pain to the nth degree like he did, right? You have to have this like combo platter of everything, and I think he had that, right? It was a mixture of his upbringing, what happened when he was little, as well as his own mental disabilities, like his own thing going on. Like, it doesn't, like, you have to have that combo platter. Like, I don't think that mental disabilities equals murder, and I don't think trauma equals murder. But sometimes when those two things link up, that can cause this. So anyways, he was at this mental institution. Very bright guy. He convinced, he was such a manipulator, as you said. He convinced, basically what he did, he convinced these therapists and all these people who were analyzing him for his release, he convinced them to give him the answers, right? To give, what are you looking for when you're looking for some story of rehabilitation? What answers? So he got the cheat code. And so he got released, I believe, at the age of 21. One of the doctors, all the doctors' recommendations were, don't let Ed's going to need a place to stay, right? Because he's 21. He's been in here since he's 15. He's not going to go find himself an apartment, right? He's got to go somewhere. The doctors all recommended, one thing is, we're ready to release him because he's got all the answers right. He did it, everybody. This is a success story of rehabilitation. Mm-hmm. This was like they're championing, like, we did it, guys. One of the things they said is, whatever you do, do not send him back to Clarnell.
And what did they do?
What did they do? Age 21, released, he went right back to Clarnell, who at that time was living in Northern California, like I believe Walnut Creek, San Mateo.
Which I'm sure he
or Aptos is I think the name of the town. That's why he's.
I'm sure he like worked it to like to his advantage. Like, I have nowhere else to go. Like, I'm this age. I don't have a job. I don't have, like, how am I going to survive? So I mean, it was all probably part of the plan.
It was partially part of the plan. I don't know if he. And the thing is, too, like, it's a hard, and we're neither one of us are therapists, or neither one of us have degrees in psychology or anything like that.
I should. I'm a hairstylist.
Oh, hey-oh. You and bartenders. But it's like clearly he was, not only did he have trauma, he had psychoses, and like, just picture how much you developed as an individual to be like a free person from the age of 15 to 21, right? Living on your own. He didn't have that. So he basically came out as 21 as essentially an overdeveloped 15-year-old. So he had nowhere to go. He wasn't going to find his own place. He had to go somewhere. So he went with Clarnell, right? Ended up living with her again. She, at that time, Clarnell, which is important to the story, Clarnell was an administrative assistant, I believe, for Santa Cruz. UC Santa Cruz, a college, which kind of keys into what Ed Kemper ended up doing.
If I was her, I would have kept a fucking gun under my pillow every night.
I mean, she might have.
Deadbolt my door closed.
She might have. So Ed Kemper is living in that area, right? He ended up taking hitchhikers. Just as kind of a thing.
Wait, let's go before that. When he got back, he became fascinated with police officers, right?
So one of the things that Ed Kemper tried to do when he got out of the institution is he tried to become a police officer. Yeah, I know, right?
Okay, I want to know. We need to look into this. We need to contact police officers. If you're a police officer, please hit us up and let us know if this is the thing. Supposedly, the reason why they rejected him from joining the academy was because he was too tall. Apparently, that's the thing. For me, like, if he's trying to get in my academy and I'm a police officer, I would make up that excuse knowing his history. But I think, like we were talking about prior to the podcast, I don't even think that they erased that. Like, it was like after he got out of his psych ward, he was like, it all vanished because he was better now, right?
Yeah. So he ended up getting, I believe he ended up getting his record expunged, which means it's cleared off the books. I believe at the time he was filing to be a police officer, I don't think it was an expunged. I think what happened was likely, there's some speculation on what happened, why they didn't, the police say that they didn't see his background, that they weren't aware of the two previous murders from his grandparent. I think probably what happened was, I would imagine, especially police officers at this time, he walked in with a piece of paper that said, here's my resume, or I don't know how you apply to be a police officer. Back in that day, especially, I don't know. And they looked at him like, oh shit, you're too tall. Sorry.
We have a height limit. You think, like, hey, we have this, like, intimidating, almost 300-pound guy that's 6'9". Like, fuck yeah, put him on the academy. All of them on the force. Yeah, like, I want that fucking guy.
If you need bigger cars, get bigger cars. But, like, it's not like, see, the thing about him is he was 6'9", so it's not like he was like 6'2", where they're like, ooh, like let's have like the when you go on the amusement ride and you measure up to it. They're like, no, you're definitely too tall. Like we know you're too tall.
I mean, it was the best thing they ever decided to do.
Sure. Well, also too, the Golden State. Okay, I just made this connection, and I don't know if it's a big connection, but what's up in Northern California? Because Ed Kemper tried out to be an officer, was dismissed because he was of his size, not because of his background. You know who else was who was actually a police officer in Northern California. D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer, was a former police, and he got actually fired because he stole like a can of something. I forget it was. We can do a whole episode on this.
So stupid.
Yeah, but the Golden State Killer was a former police officer. So what's up? That's all I gotta say is what's up. So he tried to be a police officer, it didn't work out. Tried a little bit of college, didn't work out. He actually ended up working for the highways department or whatever. So he had a stable job, but he ended up, because he would like to drive around, and he actually drove a motorcycle. He got hit, he got a settlement, so he got this car. So he would just drive around.
And there's speculation that it was also a head injury. And if that is true, that could have made him even more fucked up.
Well, that's one of the cores. So one of the cores, I'm not surprised that you don't know it, and I'm not surprised I do. So there's all kinds of, so like some of the key elements of being a serial killer is brain trauma, some kind of psychosis sometimes, abuse to animals, bedwetting, and I'm sure people correct me on further stuff, but there's these
small dick.
I don't think that's
a small dick made me do it.
I don't think that, but also Golden State Killer
Had a small dick.
He had a micropenis. That's one of the ways they identify.
I mean, nowadays there's surgeries.
Besides the DNA.
I mean, you don't have to go out and kill nobody. Just go get your fucking dick enlarged.
Whoa.
It is what it is. But anyway, so like you said, after that settlement, he got a bunch of money, which is scary. But he bought like one of those like wannabe like old cop cars, so like it made him feel like he was which is even more creepy because I feel like he could have like pulled people over because they say that sometimes that like they'll try to pretend they're cops and it's really just like someone in like old like retired cop car, just like ooh.
Sure.
Okay, now we can get into.
He had this, so he had this car, and he would drive around. He liked to drive around, and he started picking up hitchhikers. And his fantasies started to get darker and darker and darker, and he was still picking up passengers without any kind of. And these fantasies started to develop in his head, and he had a gun under his seat. But his first go around, when he finally lost it,
and he would purposely go to campuses, right? So he was looking for young, beautiful females.
His first murder, other than his grandparents, was in the first one started in May 1972. So this is when, and I don't know if we're going to get into the gory details because I don't think that's our show. Because I don't.
No.
More interested in the psychology more than the details. May 7th, 1972 was his first murder, and he killed two women, Mary Ann Pesky and Anita Lucchesa were his first victims, and he actually ended up...
He did dismember them.
He was big into decapitation. That was his thing, which I need to look into whether there's a correlation.
And
necrophilia. And he actually ended up, he said that in interviews, he got so confident with his murders that he ended up just dismembering people in his mom's yard or whatever. Where if she, like, anybody went out, they could see it.
I don't know, if we can not talk about this if you don't think it's appropriate just yet, if you want to continue, but it just popped in my head. So one of the interviews that he discussed, about like reasoning for killing these women and raping them. And at some point, he felt inferior, like he wasn't good enough to date. He felt awkward, uncomfortable around females. And so I think the rage of just like not knowing, which again probably came from his mother, like making him feel like lesser than. So he never really felt like worthy to date somebody. And that's where I'm like, maybe he had a small dick. But, because he didn't feel worthy of dating women, he was just like, well, I'm just going to kill them then and then have my way with them because they would never date me anyways.
That's one of his...
this is what he said in one of the interviews, by the way. Not the small dick part, but I just threw that in there.
You just threw that in there. That was his basic reasoning. That's the explanation he gave. Was this kind of feeling of ineptitude. Like I think he actually described it as not physical impotence, but emotional impotence is kind of how he described it.
Mm-hmm. So he made that very
You made that very clear.
I am not impotent. And
Just for the record.
But are you, though?
So his first two victims, he takes them out. He actually takes one of the victims. I'm not sure which one, but he takes one of the victims. I don't know if the details matter on that. And he murders, and he actually leaves another person in the car. And one of the things that gets into his psychosis, one of the things that I heard him say is that he actually brushed his hand up against one of the victim's breasts, and he said, "Oh, I'm sorry about that."
Before he killed her.
Yeah. He was just...
Sorry, I'm not going to kill you, but sorry I accidentally touched your tit.
Yeah. So he did that. He actually, that was, the first two murders might actually been his last, because he, for a while, we saw an interview where he thought he had locked his keys in the trunk where he put the first victim, and he was freaking out because he would have been caught, because you got nowhere to go, essentially. But he actually was in one of his pockets, so he was really.
And then he also remembered he had the gun too. So
yes, picked up Aiko Ku, who was another 15-year-old victim, which is awful. She was running late to her lessons, I think ballet lessons. After missing a bus, he picked her up and murdered her and dismembered. Another Cindy Shaw is another 18-year-old that he killed, and all these are. As well as Rosalind Thorpe and Allison Liu, and all these are college students. And his reasoning behind college students, apparently, was that he said that because his work, this fucking guy, because his mom worked at a college and she loved, like one of the things she said she loved, like the students there, right? That she was an advocate for the female students, like that he thought by doing this to college, he was getting back at her.
Yeah.
This is so fucking stupid. So fucking stupid. So he keeps doing this, and I think it lasts till February 1973 was his last college co-ed murder. And he's got away with all these, right? The cops don't know. He hangs out, actually.
Didn't he have someone in his trunk while he went and hung out with the cops? He had literally just killed somebody, and then went to the local bar, hung out with the buddies, and I think then after
he was actually pulled over right after a murder for a taillight, but he just the cops like, you're broken taillight.
Oh, it's Big Ed. Hey, Big Ed.
Yeah, Big Ed. So he would hang out. One of the things he would do, he would hang out in the local watering hole for a lot of police officers. I think called the jury room, and he would get info. He would press people for info, and so the cops all knew him. They knew him as Big Ed. They knew it was this guy who tried out for the force.
And they would the police officers would literally be talking about these cases of murder and whatever, and there's Big Ed right there in the middle of it. Like, wow, really? Like, so he was getting all this insight on who they thought it was, which they didn't have anybody. And so could you just imagine, like, I don't know. I want to know your opinion, but I feel like for these police officers not have any inkling that this man could be dangerous. Like, I'm kind of like, dude, like, you aren't fulfilling your job as a police officer. Like, how did you not have any inkling?
I think it's tough. I mean, because if you look at, like, when you first saw him being interviewed, right, you said that he looks like just a normal guy, right?
Yeah.
Talks like a normal guy. Seems like a kind of nice guy.
The manipulation.
So, and they didn't have any physical evidence against him. So, what would make them to believe that Ed was doing this?
True.
They had no reasoning. I
just feel like being a police officer, though, that's kind of like always. It could be anybody, you know. Like
sure,
you have
but
to,
it could be anybody. But you can't just like say everybody's. Because I think
the cop groupie,
as opposed to, because I think he was just a guy. I think they saw him. They didn't see him hanging out at this watering hole for police. It makes sense from their end, like.
But he came alone. He never had a partner.
Here's why I think it makes sense in their heads, right? I'm not saying he could have gave clues that like he did it and they just didn't pick up. I think one, when we're discussing this as a two-parter, I think Ed was clearly bizarre, right? And he was an oddball, and everybody thought he was really weird. Nobody knew about Ed's past, right? They didn't know that he killed his grandparents. And two, I think Ed,
which is so wild.
Ed was functional enough to know how to talk to people, to seem like a completely straight and normal guy. Like, he knew how to talk.
True.
And also the reason, like, you might go to the fact that, like, well, why is this guy hanging out in a local cop bar? One, it was just a bar. Like, it wasn't cop exclusive. It wasn't a membership club. And two, I think a lot of these officers knew
he wanted to be
that Ed wanted to be a cop. He's a guy who's idolizing cops.
So they felt bad for him.
We know plenty of people who wanted to be, like, it completely makes sense in a world where, like, someone wanted to be an athlete and they never made it professional, but they try to hang out at, like, athlete bars, or like someone wanted to be a musician, so they hang out with try to hang out. So he was just to the cops. Courtney, he was trying to, like, jeez, he was trying to, like, chum up because he secretly wanted to be a cop. That was
speaking of serial killers,
just because of unfortunate. Oh my god, maybe. So yeah, he's getting all this info. So February of 1973 was his last co-ed murder, right? And I think in his head, for whatever reason, I don't know how much I believe this, but apparently, according to him, in his head, he knew that this was something that shouldn't be done and that it had to stop. And so to test himself, he picked up two college co-eds, right, and hitchhiking, another situation,
to see if he can restrain,
see if he can hold off.
The
and
urge.
This is all him, his own words. But he wanted to see if he can hold off the urge. So these college co-eds asked for a ride to, I think, Simple Mills Community College or something like that. And they insist. The crazy part is, Ed knows where this college is, right? And they insist on it being one way. And Ed knows that the college is in one direction. This is he knows the directions to get to college. These girls are asking to go in a completely opposite direction because they're convinced that the college is in a completely opposite direction. Do you know where that opposite direction led to?
Where it was killing time.
Where they killed the first pair of poor innocent girls.
So he knew if he would listen to them and go that wrong direction,
he knew that he would end up, it'd be too tempting and he would just veer off and kill him. But he held his own for fucking once, a douchebag. He held his own and he said, believe me, this is the way we need to go. Almost like pleading, like, I don't want to murder you.
And it's almost, you know what's funny? I bet you what was going through this girl's head is like, oh my God, is this guy going to kill us? Like, he's so adamant about going this direction.
I'm sure they were frightened, yeah.
Yeah, like, and it's like, why is he so, like, and especially if they both thought it was a certain way. Like, I would be just putting myself in their situation, like we're in this guy's car. He's not going the way that we're telling him to go. I'm freaked the fuck out. There's no map quest, you just fucking have to, like, believe this asshole, so wild.
It's crazy. And some of just to get into some of his methods. So apparently one of his things to convince girls to get in the car is he would act like he was in a rush.
Oh yeah. Like, if you want to ride, we got to go. He was
looking at his watch because in his mind, and this is a master manipulator thing, in his mind, and it worked too often, unfortunately, he knew that if someone was going to hitchhike, they'd be less likely to think he was a serial killer if he was like, oh, I'm in a rush, I guess I'll pick you up. Like, if he was like,
I'm doing you such a big favor. Hurry up and
in the eyes of a lot of people, if someone was too eger, like, oh, let me pick you up, let me take you, like, you'd be like, oh, this guy's a little too eager. But it's a guy who's like, oh, I guess so, whatever. Like, just get in.
That just gives you a glimpse of the manipulation that he had over everybody.
So he does this, right? And he ends up miraculously for these girls, and they haven't been identified. They didn't come out in like a fucking, They probably don't even know still. You know what I mean? They probably didn't even, maybe they weren't even thinking twice about it. They probably didn't. And it's not like, it's not like today, getting back to Brian Laundrie and Gabby Petito, like, it's not like now where, like, so many people know, like, if they were in that area, like, they're going to call, they're going to know. Like, back then, like, if you didn't pick up the paper or watch the local TV, like, you didn't fucking know. Like, there wasn't social media where you're just constantly glued into all the fucking current events.
Yeah.
So he ends up dropping them off. And at that point, according to him, he said to every single person who was willing to interview him, at that point, I knew I had to kill my mother.
To kill the urge It would make everything stop.
He said that, according to him, he knew that until his mother was dead, he would keep recreating the killing of his mother through these other women that he decapitated, and he did all this crazy stuff. He was a necrophile too, so we won't get into details, but he liked it was with benefits. I wanna fuck the dead. That. So he sat on his mind that he was gonna finally end it through his mother. And the time between this... All it took
was one nice big argument that they would have on the daily, I'm sure.
Yeah. And at that point, it was a week before what ended up happening to Clarnell. And on April 20th, 1973, Ed had been drinking.
How old was he at this point?
I think Ed was 24 at this point when he got arrested, because this was shortly after. Shortly after he got arrested. Spoiler alert. But April 20th, 1973, Clarnell, Ed drinks, kicks back a few, he falls asleep, a little bit tipsy, gets woken up by his mom coming back from a party. And she's in her room, she's reading a paperback like all old moms in 1970s did. She's reading a paperback, and he comes in her room, and then she says, I suppose you're going to want to sit up all night and talk now. Kemper's only replied to that, because I think that kind of pissed him off, because that was one of the things she used to do. She used to apparently, and this is the thing that gets me into, like, Kemper secretly, as much as he hated her, he loved her, and he was obsessed with her in a dangerous and chaotic and toxic way, because that pissed him off, because he would come in every once in a while and want to talk when she would get home from her lady parties or whatever, or lady parties. And it pissed her off. It pissed him off that she didn't want to talk.
Right.
And also, too, in recounting this story, so Ed Kemper in these interviews, if you can find these interviews all over YouTube, because, again, he's open to talk to anybody.
It's kind of fascinating. I should check him out.
He's as cold as can be when he talks about, I picked up these two co-eds and I did this and this happened. He's very matter of fact, right?
Yeah.
It's just, this is what happened.
It really gives you a real glimpse into the eyes and mind of a serial killer.
Sure.
And it's scary, but at the same time, it's fascinating, you know? It reminded me of, like, Silence of the Lambs, like those interviews and stuff, like she's asking questions and, you know, it's like you're watching these interviews and this is real.
Well, I think that for serial killers, like, there has to be an emotional attachment, right? Because if you're a serial killer and you end up killing a bunch of people, if you get emotional about it, you're going to stop. Like, the reason why they do this is because they're detached, because it's a psychosis of just like, I'm going to do this to fit my sexual needs or whatever it may be, for revenge on my mother, or both, in the case of Ed Kemper. But it's emotionally detached. Like, he would say that when he would murder, that it was just a means to the end. He just wanted the body, right? He wasn't really interested in. He was interested in the act,
suffering,
being the means to the end, but he didn't want to make them suffer. He just wanted to, and that's not everybody. Like, BTK is deemed BTK for a reason. Like, he's not nicknamed Bind, Torture, Kill because it's like people are clever. There's some people who bask in that, but for Ed, it didn't. And so he had this emotional detachment. But the only time, in all the interviews, again, I feel like I know Ed too well, but on all the interviews that I saw with Ed, the only time he got emotional, the only time he got choked up, and this might be for cameras or whatever, but I think there was some realism in it, is when he recounted the story of his last time he talked to his mother, and his mother said, I suppose you're going to want to stay up all night and talk. And he got emotional, and he said, no, I don't think I will. That's the only time he got emotional. So everything is just triggered by this. It's this weird, ritualistic murder.
And then he states, once she was gone, it was like all that rage and all that power to kill and urge and thirst just went away.
That's what he says. I wonder how much of that is true.
I'm scared because, you know, he's still in prison.
He's very old now.
I know, but who the fuck? Can you imagine all the people he could manipulate and has manipulated?
Oh, sure.
Or just, you get in the wrong hands of like some dumbass, like wet behind the ears cop that's in there, and it's all over.
You said wet behind the ears. That's such an old-timey phrase. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
So,
shut up.
So Ed had that. That was his last conversation with his mother. His life. I mean, Ed.
Could we talk about? I know we don't want to get too gory, but I think it's.
We'll talk about it.
Prevalent what he did to his mom.
Yes. We're leading up to it. This is weaving a tale, honey bunny.
Oh, fuck off.
I know. So Ed, that was his last conversation with her. He stays up for a few hours. Just sits there pondering. About 5 a.m., he decides it's time to take action. He comes in with a hammer and bludgeons her to death, essentially. But that's not it. He doesn't walk away. He doesn't say this is done. He ends up decapitating his mother too. Performing acts on his mother, which is just, again, like, I know that you say that you was bent by hatred of your mother, and I know it's it's a power thing. You're finally taking power. But he had his way with his mom's head, right? So that you're not going to, it's a love-hate thing. He tore out her vocal cords or vocal box and threw it down the garbage disposal, played darts with her head. Then he called up Sally Hallett, who was one of Clarnell's very good friends. And he said, "You want to have dinner?" And apparently, again, we get back to like the cops not suspecting it. Sally is not like, oh my God, like he's inviting me for dinner. Like,
she didn't really want to come. He had to persuade her.
But she still came.
Yeah.
And he ended up murdering her.
And so did he.
And that was supposedly, for a while, he thought that was going to be his alibi, was Sally. That me and Sally, I couldn't have done this because Sally and I went off to a trip to Colorado. That was one of his potential alibis he was thinking about. But he does this, and he has his way. And then he rents a car, heads out to Colorado, I believe a few days later. So he fled the scene. He drove nonstop to Pueblo, Colorado, taking caffeine pills to stay awake for the over 1,000-mile journey. He had 3 guns at the time and hundreds of rounds of ammunition in his car. And he believed he was the target of an active manhunt. So Ed Kemper does this, and he books it out there, and he's like, they're going to come after me. They're coming after me. I'm going to be ready for this. He turns on the local TV station, or the network TV, nothing.
Makes me so angry.
Nothing, right? So because for the investigators, they don't know that Clarnell or Sally are missing or dead. They have no idea. Like, they're just in the apartment because he stuffed them in the closet after he was done with them. So they just, as far as the police are concerned, Clarnell's going to more dinner parties.
This just popped in my head. Where the fuck are the sisters at this point? Because if he was like only 24 when this all was going down, was his sisters older than him or younger?
So there's one older, one younger.
So were they like off to college?
There's not a lot of mention. Maybe because they want to keep them.
Yeah. That's what keeps going through my head. Like, obviously they weren't living with their mom, but they had to have been away at school, I'm guessing.
I don't know. I mean, yeah, I don't know. And there's no, because sometimes what this stuff happens, family members sometimes have this weird forgiveness thing where their sisters will still talk to Ed out of a sense of like, like forgiveness and all this stuff. I don't know if Ed's ever had contact with his sisters. Yeah. There's not a lot about his sisters, whether they ever lived with Ed and Clarnell when he got out of.
Yeah.
I would imagine his sisters were probably pretty pissed off that he killed their grandparents. I mean, I'm imagining they were probably cut him off.
And I could see them, if they were living at home and he was like, I'm coming back to live at home, I could see them being like, okay, we're going to the other living with his mom's parents or something like that. I could see them leaving and being like, hell no, we're not living in this house with him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyways, continue.
That just popped in my head. The police have no idea what's going on. They don't know. They know that there's a co-ed killer. They don't know about Clarnell or Sally. So they're looking for a serial killer. So they don't notice that Ed's gone because he's not on surveillance or anything. He's not even a person of interest. But he sees the TV. He notices that there's no coverage of of him, because I think a lot of investigators, once the investigators found Clarnell and Sally, he would definitely be a person of interest. Like, because you were in the house, why are you gone? So he knew that. So he thought like they would discover the body somehow, someone's find a smell, something like that, and they would look to him first. But they didn't know that the two were dead. So he looks at the TV, he's completely disappointed, because I think at this point he wants to be out of it for whatever.
I think he mentioned in one of his interviews she had to die and he had to die, and he tried to kill himself.
He said in the interview, he said that once he picked up those hitchhikers and he didn't end up killing them, he knew that he had to die and she had to die. So that was his resolution. Why I think maybe he wanted to go to Colorado in a blaze of glory, but realized that nobody's tracking him. So he sees this and he ends up calling the police, because he's like, what the fuck? I think he also wanted his 15 minutes of fame too, as being this person. He calls up the police. And this is the part where I'm like, the police, come on, guys. He calls up the police station, the local police station where all these murders have happened. And he says, I want to confess to a crime. I killed my mom. I killed her friend. I don't remember if he confessed to all the co-eds at that point, but he said, I did all these horrific acts. You need to come arrest me. And the cops are like, hey, it's Big Ed. Or it's a person posing it. And they completely thought it was a prank. So much so that he kept trying to, and they hung up on him, thinking it was a big, massive prank. Oh, Big Ed. Like, that's how much he convinced people that he wasn't that guy. So he had to call back, and he knew a one police officer who he knew would end up trusting.
Or meeting up with him.
And so, they didn't end up meeting up. He calls this person, and they finally believe that he's telling there's some merit in this. So Pueblo call, the local police get on the horn real quick with Pueblo and say, arrest this man. They kept him on the line, tracked where the payphone was, and they arrested him. So now at this point, Ed Kemper is in jail. Oh, he's in custody. Sorry, not in jail. And that's when it all unravels. And he confesses to everything, much like Ed Gein. These two Eds are an open book. Like they once they got the relief of Mother, like they both just fucking spewed all their shit. No real dispute in the murders on who did it. He was given, apparently, just as a side, he was given truth serum, which is opiates and everything. You know what truth serum is? Sometimes I don't know if they still. I don't think they have this practice, but they would give what they would call truth serum, which was a mixture of opioids and stuff like that, which probably partially came from MK Ultra.
I was thinking that. I was thinking that too.
Oh, they would do that all the time. They like MK Ultra would the CIA would give people these truth serum, and they would just get people fucked up. And they might be a little more truthful, but they would just get people fucking fried instead. So he confessed all these stuff. That's when I know that he mentioned before we started recording that you saw that he did cannibalism. He dabbled in cannibalism, like he cooked up a little bit, and I think he realized it wasn't for him. And that's really it, because he had his trial. I don't know if we want to get into the fucking trial, because it was like, he did it. Okay, he did it. He was convicted of 8 counts of homicide, 6 college co-eds, 2 his mom and his mom's friend, as well as if you take into account the previous, he's in total. Ed Kemper is responsible for 10 homicides total. Ed, again, like kind of what we alluded to, Ed went on a fucking book tour essentially and did interviews all over the place. He was very open. Like any forensic psychologist, any pathologist, like he would talk to all of them. He would do all kinds of interviews.
Yeah, that's why I really feel like Silence of the Lambs status. Like,
I'm sure there was some inspiration, and I think that what the reason why we stumbled into Ed is because of a kind of Halloween movie inspirations, horror movie inspirations, and this guy, not only was he a mama's boy, but I think he might be the closest to Mike Myers, because if you look at Mike Myers, tall big guy, right? Family killer. That's
killer.
Mike Myers' origin stories. He killed his family, got out. I mean, For the record, John Carpenter doesn't say that he was inspired by Mike Myers. He said he was inspired by a visit to a psych ward, and there's the babysitter killer myths and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. But look at Ed Kemper. Family killer, killed his family early on in life. He wasn't as young as Mike Myers was, but he killed him at 15. That's pretty goddamn young. Gigantic. Kind of the pure sense of evil in that he killed people without remorse.
And maybe not by physically wearing a mask, but he wore a mask by his personality and how he could hide who he truly was with the manipulation. So in a sense, he was wearing this mask. I mean, look at what the police officers. So, and
one of the things too that sets him apart from the fictional character Mike Myers is that I feel like here's the thing with Ed Kemper. I feel like if Ed Kemper wanted to continue, he could have gone on for a very long time. But something in him turned himself in. Yeah. Whatever that may be, either he rationalized that he was eventually going to get caught because someone's going to check on Clarnell. Everybody's going to look for him, first of all, because he skipped town. Maybe he realized that the gig was up, but he turned himself in. And he turned himself in when he killed his grandparents. So that's about the only thing that sets him aside from Mike Myers is that the fictional Mike Myers would keep going. But something in him told him to give it up.
Question.
Sure.
And
I don't know how I thought the two Eds would be one episode.
I know. That's a lot of info. Speaking of both Eds.
Ed and Ed.
Which one do you think is more demented? Because I personally think, I mean, obviously they both are, but if you were to go who's on like this other level of demented, I would say Ed Gein, only because, like, yes, you had, the other Ed that would, like, decapitate people, but this guy was at another level, like, where he would wear, their skin on their face, make pants out of, like, bodysuits, put makeup on them, decorate his house, his chairs with skin of a human. So for me, like, I think that is next level, like, fucking disgusting insanity. I feel like Ed Gein, like, takes the cake when it comes to fucking psychopath, like worst of the worst.
Yeah, I think Ed Gein is the more demented figure. I think that because also too, there's a few things. One is making all the furniture and stuff like that, and not. I don't think in Ed Gein's mind, I think Ed Kemper knows that what he did is wrong, right? He knows that.
But does he? Like, that's another thing. Like, for me, because like I said, he wears a veil over his face. I feel like, does he say that because he knows that's what he should be saying, because that's what he learned when he was in all those years in the psych ward? Did he over time just, this is what they want me to hear? Because when I've watched other interviews with other serial killers, they're like, there's something inside of us that we don't feel the way that you feel. Like, if this is right or wrong, we don't feel that. Like, it's just how they're wired.
I think that Ed Kemper was I think they were both driven by compulsion in different ways. I think that Ed Gein, I think Ed Kemper knows by society's standards what he did was wrong. I don't know how much regret he actually feels for it. He says he feels regret for it, but who fucking knows? He's a manipulator. Mm. I think that he's bright enough and smart enough to know that what he did is not sustainable. It's not okay. It's not. He was just working off of impulses and all this stuff. Ed Gein, I don't think he ever. And one of the things too is Ed Kemper. I think the reason why Ed Kemper is less, probably, I think you have a fair point, is less demented, is because Ed Kemper knew that he should cover up what he's doing, and he was able to do it for a while, and he gave himself up because he knew, whether it was altruistic, which I don't believe, or whether he knew that it was time, like he was going to get caught eventually, he just gave himself up, right? Mm-hmm. Ed Gein was out there because he built all this stuff, and he just ended up murdering someone in broad daylight and not really covering up and not
and he would
really
make
understanding
jokes
that
about
it's
it
wrong.
too. I think one time when the lady was
Mary Hogan. So Ed Gein, when Mary Hogan disappeared, which was it's his second confirmed murder, or it's first confirmed murder.
she was a bar owner.
One or two, yeah, she was the bar owner in 1954. So people would talk about it, right? Because Mary was gone. She was a bar owner. Nobody knew her in town. It was a small town. Like, oh my God, nobody's seen Mary. Nobody knows who Mary's. And Ed Gein would joke like, he would. I think they thought it was a joke, but he was joking. He said, "Oh, she's up in my barn."
And seeing stuff like that, where I'm like, because his IQ was like the opposite of Ed Kemper. Like this guy was a dum-dum, Ed Gein.
Definitely emotionally stunted for sure.
Yeah.
Probably not the brightest.
So for him to say that was just so like, but nobody even believed it. Even though it's different because with Ed Kemper, like I don't think people really thought it. They probably felt more bad for him. It was like, oh, he's alone. Like he doesn't have a partner. Da, 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 da. Like he was better at communicating and having more of a social life. It seemed like, but it seemed like Ed Gein, it was like he was kind of a weirdo. Yeah, he would do dinner parties with people occasionally, but I feel like that was just more probably out of pity because his family is all dead. You know.
Yeah, and Ed Gein is, and I think that Ed Kemper, I think he realizes, Ed Gein never realized how damaged he was because of his mother, right? He just loved his mother. He would just worshipped his mother without realizing the toxic nature of that worship. Mm-hmm. Ed Kemper was fully aware that, like, he was obsessed with his mother out of hatred, out of anger. Like, you know, and I think that Ed Kemper never realized how much maybe that was obsession with his mother. Maybe that was another version of almost anti-heroes, anti-worshipping. Like because Ed Kemper had the chance he had a stable job. He had all this stuff. He actually moved out for a while, but moved back. He had a chance to get out of this. And he had a chance to disassociate with her. Like he had a chance to just remove her completely from this equation. But he never did. Like he kept holding on to her in some way, even though he said he hated her, even though he said he did these acts in her name as a way of ritualizing her own murder before he ended up actually doing it. He had a chance to get out, but he didn't. He was attracted to it in some way. Like I don't know.
Yeah,
I think Ed Gein is definitely the more, in terms of demented. Ed Gein is definitely more demented. Thankfully, again, like we said in the previous, thankfully he was kind of too sloppy and too emotionally, too dumb to cover up his crimes. Yeah. Because I do think if Ed Gein would have been able to keep going, he would have ended up doing much
if he
more
had
damage.
the IQ of Ed Kemper, like for sure, like it would be scary. The story would get.
I mean, he was more
grotesque.
he was more demented. I mean, both of them are fucks, but he was definitely more demented. So I don't know. Well, this has been a fun episode of Extra Normal Podcast. My name is Christoph. Alongside me is Brianna. Brianna, where can they find you?
In Kittyland. You can find me at Darling Dolly with the O instead of a 0.
A 0 instead of an
O.
O.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that.
All right.
What I said. And yeah, same place they can find you.
Awesome. You can find us on Instagram at Extra Normal Podcast. Find us on Twitter at Extra Normal P. You can email us at extranormalpodcast@gmail.com. Like us and subscribe on Twitter, or on YouTube, on Twitch, on all those fun channels. If you listen to us via the audio forms, make sure you give us some stars to get us boosted up. And thank you so much for listening.